Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and co-parents of all ages, this podcast is for you. Introducing and centering the Amicable divorce expert, Judith Weigel.
Joining me in centering today is you. I wanted to take a moment to speak to all of you directly and personally about something that I think is extremely important in our self-growth. And this is the perfect time to talk about it because it's the end of the year, we're in the holiday spirit, or the holidays are really bringing us down and preventing us from enjoying them for ourselves, enjoying them with our friends and family. So today's topic, give yourself the gift of forgiveness this holiday season, I think is extremely important. We've all been told that forgiving the other person does not release that person's responsibility of whatever happened in the relationship. It frees our spirit and our heart to be able to move past the relationship issue. It does not release the forgiven of responsibility. So we talk about that a lot in the 7 stages of divorce grief. We talk about that important step of forgiving the other person so that we can move forward and have a lighter heart. Forgiving ourselves, though, is also important for us to move forward in the relationship or in our own lives. And we speak less about forgiving ourselves, but self-forgiveness is critical. It's the difference between carrying guilt and shame to the point where our lives have come to an emotional halt and negatively impact our behavior and our mental, spiritual, and physical health. So give yourself the gift of forgiveness so that you can work on whatever that issue or issues are that have caused a relationship transition, marriage to divorce. Regifting, I love this term in relationship to this topic. Regifting may have to take place in order to see our world differently and move forward with a lighter heart. So we have to regift ourselves forgiveness each time something happens that we need to look at, identify, break apart, and learn from. So what types of relationship crimes, if you will, can be committed that gnaw at you, plaguing you, begging you to be addressed? Well, there are quite a few. So I'm going to talk about a handful of them. First one, working overtime consistently and not spending time with your spouse and the children. All right, I hear this a lot from people like policemen or people who work in the entertainment industry in Los Angeles, which is where I live and work. So we want to do the best, making money, advancing our careers, providing the best for our families. And I see this happen all the time. So in so doing, being type A people, being people who want to be the most responsible, we actually lose the relationships that we're working for. We lose the connection to our spouses and our children while we're trying to do the best for them. Isn't that interesting? What a dichotomy. And all of a sudden, we find ourselves at a point where we are unfamiliar with each other. We don't know what's going on in the family because we're working. Well, it's not such a bad vice to have to work. I mean, you don't get ahead unless you do work. You don't get ahead in terms of wealth unless you make money. So where's that point, though, within your family and within your relationship to excelling? Where's that point where we do too much? Where's that point where we are living our own lives separately and we're not participating with our families? Our families go to family reunions without us. Our families may travel without us. Our families may go to school events without us. I mean, doesn't this sound familiar? I think the first thing that has to happen, just to backtrack a little bit, is if you're going to start a family, if you're going to get married and have children, you really have to talk with your spouse about what that looks like. What that looks like in terms of each of your duties, what that looks like in terms of, well, when is working too much? What is allowable time away from the family versus necessary time with the family? These are really important conversations to have because I hear this a lot. We just grew apart. And how has that impacted you? Have you found yourself growing apart because you spent so much time at work with all the right intentions of providing with the family? How did that impact your transition out of the marriage into divorce? I mean, it's not as bad as some of the other things I'm going to bring up next, but it's something that actually affects the unity, the harmony, the togetherness of the family that you wanted to create and the family for whom you're doing all this work. So if you can reevaluate this, if it can change, if you can maybe stop the divorce process if you're in the middle of it, just to see if maybe something different can happen and the rebonding can be reestablished, do it. But if it can't, if you have truly grown apart and the love is gone and you can't get it back, forgive yourself. And when you get into your next relationship, have a different discussion. Really become realistic about work drove us apart, and I don't want that to happen in this relationship. So acknowledge it and then do what you have to do to change it. Next, fidelity, either sexual or financial. So as we learned in previous podcasts, there are two types of infidelity. There's sexual infidelity and there's financial infidelity, and both are devastating. In terms of sexual infidelity, boy, that is a really sensitive area because that involves trust, well, as does financial infidelity. The trust is a little bit different because in sexual infidelity, you're really dealing with that aspect of the relationship that you wanted to have very specific to the relationship. It is so intimate. It is our bodies coming together, but within that, our emotions are involved. Some relationships can rebound and other relationships cannot. So if you have a relationship that is not able to rebound, yes, apologize to your spouse if you're the one that perpetrated it, but also forgive yourself if in fact it was the wrong thing to do. If in fact you really do feel this was the thing that brought the relationship down. Now, it may be the thing that didn't really bring the relationship down. You may have committed infidelity for many other reasons, and you may find those reasons justifiable. But if you have perpetrated the demise of the relationship through sexual infidelity, and it can't come back, you have to apologize to the other person, but at some point, you have to forgive yourself. Because if you don't, you won't be able to look at why you committed infidelity. And you may do it again. And that's something you don't want to do. You want to break that pattern. You know, people engage in infidelity because they don't know what else to do. They don't know how to address relationship issues. And so they go outside of the relationship to feel fulfilled, to feel accepted, to feel good about themselves again. But we don't. We don't if we really wanted our marriage to stay intact, and it didn't. We don't feel good about ourselves. And there are so many reasons that are, part of the demise of the relationship, not the least of which is, what did we learn as kids? What did we witness in our parents' relationship? There's this thing called the genome family tree that some therapists, not all, but some therapists really pay attention to, because what we learned in our parents' relationship by watching it, what we learned in relationship to our parents, that really crafts our relationships with other people. And so we have to go that far back if we are prone to committing infidelity, if we are prone to go outside of our relationship sexually, really go back and look at, well, what did we see with our parents? Or did our parents commit infidelity? Are we repeating the actions of our parents and we don't even know it? Do we have this muscle memory that we have to deal with? And that's what it is. It's muscle memory. It's behavior that is ingrained in us, behavior patterns of our parents, maybe not us, but our parents, but still it's learned behavior. And we repeat learned behavior without even knowing it. But unless we forgive ourselves, we're not going to have the space to go back and learn and revise the way we want to have relationships going forward. Now, let me address financial infidelity. It is an issue. It's spending money without our spouses knowing we're spending money is financial infidelity. And I interviewed, I can't remember whether it was earlier this year or last year. I interviewed two doctors, two therapists, Alex Melkumian and Megan McCrory. And they specialize in financial infidelity. Financial infidelity has emotional undertones to it. It has both emotional undertones and it has learned behavior. So we can go back and look at our parents. How did our parents spend money? Were they on budgets? Were they a team? Did they both work together to use the money the family had to not only live well, but save money for the future? Did we learn that? Or did we learn that spending money just seemed to be what our parents did, and we didn't learn how to save money? And this is not to fault parents, by the way, never, ever, ever. This is a divorce. This is a podcast for amicable divorces. So I'm not here to blame anybody, but we're here to learn. So what did we learn from our parents? And are we repeating that behavior? Or what did our spouses learn? And are they repeating that behavior? Because financial infidelity also has an issue of trust attached to it. We have to trust that the monies that we earn during the marriage are going to be spent in a healthy way. And if they're not spent in a healthy way, why? What's the behavior that's being acted out by us or our spouses through money? So obviously, we can talk to our spouses if it's our spouses, but if it's us, we really have to dig deep, figure out why spending money surreptitiously, spending money without telling our spouses is our behavior. Why? We have to figure this out, because not only is it detrimental to the relationship, but it's detrimental to yourself, to us, because we'll never move forward well financially if we don't get a grip on how we look at money, how we save money, how we spend money, because that in and of itself represents what we think of ourselves. Isn't that interesting? Money represents what we think of ourselves. And why don't we get pleasure out of saving money? Why do we get more pleasure out of spending money? It provides an emotional fulfillment one way or another, and we have to figure out why. Next, drug abuse, sorry. drug abuse, gambling, any behavior that's excessive, that detracts from the health of the relationship. Drug abuse is tough. Gambling is tough. Any abuse to the relationship, how we spend money, excessive shopping, excessive eating, excessive playing, excessive anything, buying toys that we can't afford, planes, trains, automobiles, boats. Do we spend money on things that are excessive, that are abusive, and that ruin the relationship? So if you engage in any activity that's excessive and abusive, there's a lot of help out there for you. There are all these 12-step programs. There's 12-step programs for anything. But join a 12-step program. Those 12-step programs force us to look at ourselves, force us to forgive ourselves and then apologize for our behavior. Those 12-step programs are wonderful. I think if we all looked at ourselves and looked at what do we do that's excessive. I just thought of another one that I hadn't written down before, and that's exercising. Some people go crazy on exercising. I know somebody who literally left his son at the house at 6 a.m. to go exercise. Wife was away. Son and father were the only two people in the house. Son wakes up, no father around, no note, no nothing. Son freaks out, calls mom. Mom calls dad. Where are you? What's going on? I mean, any behavior in excess is behavior that is unhealthy and that we have to modify it. And that's just kind of living in our own head. One of the aspects of excessive behavior is we live too much in our own heads. Whatever's going on in us, with us, it stays inside of our own heads. It's not released. And so therefore, it becomes problematic behavior. And something as simple as exercising. Oh my God, how could exercising be bad? Well, if you exercise 3 and 4 times a day and neglect your children, that's pretty bad. If you use money that is intended for food, that's bad. If you have secret bank accounts and take money out of the joint bank account and put it in the secret bank account so that you can spend money at an alarming rate, not telling your spouse. Because what happens in trust, what happens in relationships, and it's probably in yours as well, you divide duties. One person primarily goes out and works, and the other person watches the children, stays home. Or if both people work, you still have to divide up the domestic duties. Who does the banking, who pays the bills, who takes care of the house. So if both people work, I know you're dividing other duties that have to take place. And this is where excessive behavior comes in. And this is where secret behavior comes in. And none of that is towards the health and welfare of the family. Domestic violence, that's abusive behavior. Domestic violence is something that is so detrimental to ourselves and to our spouses that it must be dealt with straight away, head on. And there's a lot of guilt and shame wrapped up in domestic violence. So if the person who's perpetrating the violence does it in a rage, does it without being able to control themselves, and does it a lot, I bet you're that same person that apologizes afterwards to your spouse. But unless you get help, unless you seriously get into therapy with self-help classes and talking to other people that have the same issue, you are never going to get better. And domestic violence raises the level until it could end in death. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say this, but domestic violence goes from emotional abuse to physical abuse, to sometimes death. And it happens without us realizing that it escalates. And you absolutely, as soon as you are aware that this behavior can be stopped, needs to be stopped, has to be stopped, you might end up in jail. And I know this sounds strong and crazy, but it happens. Domestic violence to the point where if we're in a divorce, we may abduct our children. That's part of domestic violence, abducting our children out of anger for our spouses. There's such a cycle of violence. And a lot of times violence starts with self-hatred. And we start abusing ourselves. We incur domestic violence and perpetrate it on ourselves. And that's horrible. That's self-abuse. But domestic violence is something that absolutely will go on for a while. And then when the other spouse says, okay, no, we can't do this anymore. I'm done. And there's no way you can apologize. The apologies just are not the answer anymore. Well, they're the answer to self-reckoning. They're the answer to self-awareness. They are not the answer, though, to stopping the marriage from ending in divorce. No, there's a certain point where, that's not going to work. But in order to become a healthy human being, you have to forgive yourself first. Again, what was it like when you grew up? Start going back to that genome tree. What was it like in your family? Is this what you learned? Is this what you learned in order to feel better about yourself, feel in control of yourself, feel in control of life? We take things out on our spouses in a very abusive way. If we have a tough time at work, a tough day at work, we take it out on our spouses when we get home, or our kids, or we go into excessive behavior. We drink a lot. Now that marijuana is legal in a lot of states, we do that a lot. So domestic violence is so important that we get a hold of it. But you have to forgive yourself because it's a sickness. And if we saw somebody that was born ill, we wouldn't blame them for being born ill, physically ill. We try and work with them. But when we are producers of domestic violence, it's a cycle that's hard to break out of. But we first of all have to say, okay, I need to look at where I got this from. Why am I doing this? And who do I need to engage to help me to stop? And then you'll eventually forgive yourself because you have to move on and to not re-engage in that behavior. Then we have we have the garden variety disrespectful behavior. And this is a tough one because this is low key. This flies underneath the radar a lot until it gets to the point where our spouse snaps. Maybe it's disrespectful behavior that leaves the house and is perpetrated on our spouses in public, and it becomes too humiliating. But disrespectful behavior is interesting because it sneaks up on us. And it actually happened in my marriage, and I had no idea that the way I was speaking, I guess, to my spouse, about my spouse in public, was becoming disrespectful. I had no idea I was doing this until it was brought to my attention by my ex-spouse, my former spouse. I felt horrible about it. There is no way I want to speak ill to somebody ever, and then certainly not in public and embarrass them. And then I thought about it. I said, well, where did this behavior come from? Well, I actually think it not only came from my mom, because this is the way she treated my dad. But then again, I never met my grandparents, my maternal grandparents. And if I were to piece together the disrespectful behavior I saw with my mother's siblings. So this is an old world Italian family. I love Italians. But in the Italian family, if you don't get married, you live in the same house. You never leave the house. So I had 3 aunts and uncles, 2 uncles and 1 aunt, that lived in the same house. We loved them dearly. We went there every Sunday for dinner, but we saw them argue like crazy and treat each other disrespectfully. It didn't seem like there was a lot of love. Well, 2 of them were more volatile than the third. The third was more of a peacemaker and did what he could do to keep everybody together, but the other 2 were a bit more volatile. And so I often wondered, well, what was it like in my mom's family growing up? You know, was disrespectful behavior. Did they do it kiddingly? You know, that's a lot of the way we behave and speak sometimes. You know, it's passive aggressive. We don't really identify it as passive aggressive, but it is. You know, it's little digs that, oh, we're just kidding. No, actually, if these digs keep coming up, it's not just kidding. And ask the person you're talking about how much fun they're having, you know, being the recipient of the digging. That disrespectful behavior is, it chips away at the relationship until there's nothing left. So again, look at how you grew up. Look at how your parents spoke to one another. Look at how your parents spoke to you. Did you feel respected? Did you feel heard in your family? That's a big deal. When we get older, become older, and we get into our own relationships, are we using that relationship to feel heard, to feel respected? Are we getting back at maybe the hurt we felt when we were disrespected as kids? Are we trying to get back at our parents through our marriage? You know, we're complicated. We're not easy. We're not like our animals. Our animals are not complicated. They're very easy to figure out. We are very complicated. And we bring the past forward. So please pay attention to yourselves. Excuse me. Please pay attention to yourselves when you speak to your spouses or your significant others, and look at if you're holding them up and treating them beautifully all the time, or are we criticizing them or making fun of them, thinking we're humorous? Look at their faces. See if they're getting the joke. See if they want to be the butt of the joke. Generally, they don't want to be. And are they withholding sex when we get home from an episode of disrespectful behavior at friend's house? You know, that's a key. Okay, next. Marrying when we had misgivings about the decision to marry. Okay, that's huge. If we agreed to marry and we had misgivings but didn't address them, you've now engaged somebody in a marriage that you really didn't want. Easy to feel horrible about that. Totally easy. That's a big one. That's a big one. Because I see this happen I see this happen a lot in my office. Not all the time, but a lot. Somebody will criticize, we'll be in a mediation. You never respected me. You never treated me well. You never shared what's going on in your business life with me. So we can put a laundry list of criticisms together, but it's always fascinating to me at the end of all this, when I speak one-on-one to the person issuing all the criticisms, when that person said, you know, I knew I shouldn't have gotten married and I did it anyway. I'm always surprised that comes at the end. That's a big forgiveness. Not only do you have to apologize to your spouse for marrying them, knowing that you weren't convinced it was the right thing to do, but then forgiving yourself for doing it. Again, why did you do it? This is not to beat yourself up, not to blame yourself. This is to understand yourself. Why did you do it? And you're going to come up with a list of reasons. It'll be very easy to figure out why you did it. And not one of them will be so that I could share a life together with this person who is my best friend, who is my best supporter, who I can grow with, who I can be my best self with. None of that will come out of your mouth. It'll always be insecurities to get away from my family, to provide stability when I had an unstable life. That was Adele. When I did the celebrity divorce on Adele last month, she married Simon because her father did not provide a stable life. And Simon appeared to be very stable. So she went for stability when her heart didn't sing. You know, Simon could be the best person known to mankind, greatest guy walking the face of the earth. But if he's not the exact right person for you to live your best life with, okay, obviously it wasn't for Adele. And she never ragged on Simon. Thank God she never, at least I didn't read, that she put a laundry list of ills together. She went right to herself. She looked at herself. She did the analysis. This is why she married Simon, and I hope she apologized to him. They'll probably be great co-parents together because she's not blaming him. She's really looking at herself. So she couldn't have been the best partner to Simon. Now she's releasing Simon to marry somebody else, and she's releasing herself to be with somebody else. But marrying when you had misgivings is a tough one because you did engage somebody's trust in you, that you wanted them to be your partner, that you were knowingly making this decision. That's a tough one, but it doesn't matter. You still have to apologize, forgive yourself, and then look at how not to do this again. Next. This is okay. Misrepresenting ourselves and not revealing important personal information about ourselves before we get into the marriage. And it surfaces. It could be anything. It could be saying you want to have children when you really didn't, misleading your spouse. And you may have misled them. This happens a lot, by the way. You may have misled them thinking you really wanted to, thinking that this was the right thing to do. I mean, don't so many people just grow up and choose to get married and have children because that's the way it's supposed to be without saying, well, wait a minute, is this right for me? You have to do that. You have to look at all these conventional ideas that you're given from your family, from society, from culture, from your religion, and say, well, is this really right for me? You know, that's what we're all supposed to do. We're all supposed to look at life and say, you know, break it down in all of its aspects and say, well, is this really right for me? If it's not right for you, don't do it. But to go into a marriage without talking about, well, you know what? I am terrible at spending money. I have a ton of debt. This is something that isn't always acknowledged before marriage. All the credit card debt, all the personal loans. Yeah. People go into marriage without talking about that. Then there's financial infidelity. What else don't they do? They secretly have substance abuse issues that don't come out until the marriage. And then we feel more relaxed. And so our behavior changes. Instead of being on our best behavior and hiding certain things, we relax. The hunt is over. Now we're in the same house. We don't have to worry about securing the relationship. We're in it. It's formal. It's legal. And our guard is dropped and we become the people we really are. And it doesn't work. Forgive yourself. Figure out why you weren't forthcoming. and then change the behavior that you're able to change. Not spending time to nurture the relationship. Well, I did start off by talking about working overtime and working too much, and this takes us away from home and our families. But aside from that, we can spend too much time with our friends. We can spend too much time exercising. We can spend too much time in activities that do not involve our spouses and our families now that we have them. And this will drive a wedge in the relationship. So look at your behavior. Yes, we all have to have alone time. Yes, we are individuals as well as being spouses, as well as being parents. We are also individuals. And we have to do things on our own sometimes. But each of you do, not just you. You have to talk about, well, what are those activities that I just simply like to do on my own? It makes me feel like I'm running free. I have this group of girls, I have this group of guys, and we like to get together once a month. We like to go on a trip once a year. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But make sure it's equally balanced. Make sure that you're both of the same mind, that you each get to do something on your own. But just taking off on your own, well, I'm allowed to do what I want to do, right? I'm an adult. It's a free world. No. Once you've engaged in a marriage, once you've had children, no. You are now part of a team. And team members have responsibilities to one another. And if you act in a way that's too individual, no, you're going to lose the relationship. Forgive yourself if that's happened, and then look at how to embrace both aspects of being in a relationship, spending time to nurture the relationship, spending time to have date night with your spouse. People love date night after a while. If you can find babysitters to take care of the kids, if you have children, date nights are wonderful. They really reconnect. You're not in the house anymore. You're out in a different location, and you can be flirtatious again. You can be fun. You can be your old single self for a minute. And that's so much fun. But not spending time to nurture the relationship will definitely end the relationship. Forgive yourself if that's happened, and be clearly aware not to let it happen again. And then I will conclude. If you're a relationship-oriented person and want to be in another relationship, or if you're already in another relationship, yet haven't resolved the one that is ending, you have to come to terms with the issues as you see them that caused the breakup of your marriage, or you won't be happy. You'll live in pain longer than is necessary, and you may repeat that same behavior again and again until you understand why. But, and here's the big but, forgiveness is the first step towards being able to realistically address the behavior you feel led to the divorce. I'm going to quote Maya Angelou a lot. Well, I have quoted Maya Angelou a lot. Maya Angelou, I knew from Oprah. She interviewed her a lot. They got to be best friends. And then she made one of the dedication speeches, I think. It was either Clinton or Obama. This is not a political statement. I'm an independent. But this is what she did. They used her to make these statements. So Maya Angelou is an American poet, an author, and a civil rights activist. Here's a good quote for this topic today. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, you do better. Okay, I want to say that one more time because I just love this because it really hits home with everything we've just talked about. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. I take this to mean that we are always in a process of self-evaluation, self-reflection, and self-forgiveness. None of us are perfect. We all do things that we wish we could change. But some of us do better at, I'm sorry, I just got lost. But some of us do better, and we don't have as difficult a time at self-evaluation and behavioral adjustment. And some of us have a very difficult time at it. I apologize for that. You might be the person who finds it too painful to look at yourself in the mirror of self-reflection. It's really hard to address what you may have done that hurt someone else. And I am in no way different than you. I know what it feels like to have a relationship go south, whether personal or in business. It hurts just as much if a business relationship goes awry as it does in a marriage. But I guarantee you that when you accept responsibility for what you could have done to avoid relationship distress, you'll be able to forgive yourself for being human and hopefully avoid that pattern of behavior in the future. Unless you address the core issues that motivated the behavior, you won't be able to live your best life. Lift the burden of guilt and shame, and perhaps through professional help with a therapist or life coach, figure out the why behind the behavior. And as Maya Angelou has stated, do better after knowing better. Ultimately, self-improvement is the name of the game. Whether in our families, our careers, our friendships, or in our relationship with ourselves, we have to improve to feel like a whole, healthy human being. Beating ourselves up is self-defeating, although we do it all the time, and I'm like the best at beating myself up. In fact, I will challenge you to a duel of beating yourself up, and I bet I win. But yes, beating ourselves up is self-defeating. Acknowledging imperfect humanity in the best interest of self-improvement and forgiving ourselves to remove guilt, shame, and remorse allows us to be better humans going forward. Forgiving ourselves isn't selfish, it's necessary. What has to happen, though, is that we have to use self-forgiveness to improve, not to avoid or deny, but to be able to say, okay, I did X, and in doing X, it resulted in Y. Y had unintended negative consequences that I never want to do again. How do I approach X differently in the future so that Z is the result and not Y? This is how we learn. No relationship will be perfect, but our relationships can be better, starting with our relationship to our own truth, as we take stock of our imperfections and our behavior that led to unintended and unwanted consequences in our quest for happiness and fulfilling relationships. My gift to you this holiday season is the gift of knowing you can always do better when you know better. And with that, I thank you for being part of this podcast all year long. I wish you the best holiday season ever. And as always, have an amicable day.
That's our show for today. Thank you for joining us. Be good to yourselves, be kind to your spouse, and cherish your children above all else.